Okay, we're live.
We're live, Allison. We're here. Yay. So good.
Hello, humans. I'm Allison Crowe, the host of what's my podcast called? The Wild Edge of Being Human. It's a podcast for business owners. And I'm here with one of my mentors and teachers, Chris Zydel. She is the Wild Heart Queen of Creative Juices Arts. And there's a lot of things I could have had Chris on to talk, but I specifically asked her to have a conversation about becoming crone. And I'd like to add the little caveat in the context of being a business owner, because to me, that's one of the intersections. That's when I called you and said, I need a crone session. And it was in the context of being a business owner. So yes, you know,
Great.
we go here, but also, yeah. So, here's some words I have written down that I'd love to play in at some point, and we'll see what zings with you. So I wrote crone, menopause, business, reinvention. And I think that's where I want to start with you.
Yeah, the reinvention part.
Because you have had a long career. Also practice. I mean, practice. Hello, anybody practice? You've had a really long career, and whether life has reinvented you like COVID did with taking things out of, right? But also, I'm so curious about any personal reinventions that come to mind for you.
Great. Well, it's interesting because you had the list, so what? It was crone, menopause, reinvention, and business. So I'm going to talk to all four of those.
Yay. Yeah.
Yay. Because it's interesting. So I'm 70 now. I just turned 70 in September. I'll be 71 coming up soon. And I've been in business for 45 years. So I started off as a psychotherapist. I actually started off as a body worker. So I was a massage therapist and then a breath work person. And then I ran groups and workshops and then a psychotherapist. And then when I was 42, I started Creative Juices Arts. But I didn't really have much of an online presence until I was 55. So that was a huge reinvention for me, because everything that I had done before that had been in person. I still did a lot of stuff in person after that too. But, that's when a lot of people are starting to wind down, and I was just winding up. So I started getting online and developing like a presence online. Yeah. And that's when I started my teacher training program. I started that when I was around 55. So that was a huge reinvention, so the reinvention part always includes, it's not like, all of a sudden I became a plumber,
no.
It wasn't that.
Right. But you never know.
Well, you never know. It could happen. Right.
I mean, it might not be plumber, but yeah.
Right. But I really went from, I really went from this kind of very, the word that comes to mind is parochial. I don't know why that word's coming to mind, but it was small. It was a smaller kind of a pond that I was swimming in. It was local. It was a local pond,
Yeah.
And so then when I started getting into the online world, that opened up my world incredibly in terms of the work that I do, in terms of the people that came to work with me. I developed a presence that wasn't just in the Bay Area. It was across the United States, and then it was international, and all those things. So that was a really fun time. It was really exciting, and I knew nothing about any of that when I got started. I got really curious about certain people and how they were doing, how they were showing up online and how they were doing marketing. And I reverse engineered a lot of stuff. I was talking about this with my husband the other day, and I was like, I did very little. I didn't receive a lot of coaching. I just kind of like looked at things and figured out what other people were doing. And I was like, oh, okay, I think I can work this backwards. and really understand it, you know.
Right. And 15 years ago, there weren't a lot of, like I remember coming online because I left my corporate and I had a non-compete, which was everybody in my city.
Oh, wow.
And
Right.
right. I was at a company of 105,000 people, and there were 2 of us from that company online,
Mhm. Oh, wow.
at least on Facebook. Right. And so
Yeah.
there weren't
That was it. Yeah.
people saying, here's how to build your 6-figure business online.
Right.
I wasn't
That's
even
right.
thinking. Just
Mm-mm.
one day she sent me a referral
Mm-hmm.
from Nashville, and my brain was like,
Yeah.
oh, right. So same kind of thing. I just was like, well, I know what we do offline. I think there's a way to do this here. We just don't have to leave the house or join the BNI group.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was really fun. It was really fun. And again, it was the early days, you know, it was the
Yeah.
early
Yeah.
days of all of that. And there were some people that I did come across who I started following, and they were talking about kind of heart-centered business and
Mm,
how to, you know, that really aligned with me because I've never
mm,
been like, oh, a hard sell business person. I've never been in any kind of a business where I had to do that, and it doesn't fit with who I am anyway.
sure.
And so this was like, oh, I can show up as who I am, essentially. I mean, this was
Mm-hmm.
the message that I was
Mm-hmm.
getting, you know. I can be myself. I can open my heart. I can invite people in. I can play with them. And so the whole thing was really fun. And it also, it really worked. I mean, it helped my business to grow. So both things were really true, you know. And that was post-menopause. So I
Mm-hmm.
started, I was in perimenopause probably from the time I was 45 to 52. And then I was in heavy duty menopause from 52 to
Mm-hmm.
55. And I was kind of flattened, you know, during that period. Um, I know, I know. And we can talk about that. I mean, I know you're kind of in the thick of it, and it was not a fun time.
Well,
But,
my perimenopause started at 38.
oh,
And
honey,
I'm on that edge of like my estrogen stops and then it starts back. Like I'm on the start,
yeah,
you know,
that thing.
start of the
Yeah.
next phase. But yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that part, I mean, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so I basically stopped bleeding when I was 48.
yeah.
Um, and then I was kind of like coasting along. I mean, it wasn't fun. And then when I hit 52, I was like, whoa, I fell off a cliff. So for those
Oh,
3 years, I was still working and doing my thing, but I was really struggling. And then the postmenopausal zest kicked in. I mean, it's a
yeah.
thing. It's
I
really a
know.
thing.
You said on our call and I
Yeah.
forgot what you called it, but I'm like, there's this thing and we don't know because we haven't hit it. But like,
Right.
this is a lot of my peers
Yeah.
and I are in this stage and
Yeah.
there's either no information or overload of information. But the
Right.
big thing is we're going, I don't feel normal. I don't feel normal. We're kind of grasping for the
Yeah.
vitality that we once had.
Right.
And then there's the mental health that comes with all that
Oh,
physical
yeah.
dysfunction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
what
No,
you call it? Postmenopausal zest.
zest. Yes, I didn't make
Oh,
that up. That's a thing,
no.
you know.
Yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, but it's all the things you're talking about, you know, because when I was in menopause, low energy, anxiety and depression,
Mm-hmm.
hot flashes, sleeplessness, and just feeling like who the fuck am I? Who is this person? You
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, I didn't recognize her any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one of the things that was happening for me when I was in the thick of it, you know, when it was just really, really hard, I kept thinking, okay, when this is over, I'll go back. When this is over, I'll go back to what I was. And then halfway through, I realized, wait a minute, there's no going back. There's no going back. This is just about going forward into something else.
Yeah, we got to meet the me that is right here, right now, today.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
can't even, it's so similar to the painting process because it feels a little useless to even vision.
Yes, that's right.
Because I'm still getting to know the me, both physically and psychologically, that is here today. She's so
Yeah.
new to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so it's like, okay, if you just stay in the practice, whatever result that's going to happen will happen. So it's very much like the painting process.
It's very much
Let's,
like the painting process,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's being in the moment, following the energy, you know, kind of being present to what shows up, even though if it seems weird or you don't understand it, or it's like, where the hell is this going to take me? You know, which is the painting process. So yeah, so all of that was going on. Yeah. And then then again, like I had this resurgence that was really fun. I must say that I really enjoyed, I mean, that period of my life, that 15 years ago. And it went on for quite a while. So yeah.
I can wait for that because the advice you gave me. So there was it was like a Saturday morning, and I've come off to this date the hardest year, actually the hardest 18 months of event after event after event after event after event that happened to be while I was at the crux of examining my own trauma and coping mechanisms, and then perimenopause, and then diagnosed with ADHD.
Yes.
And so I would talk to I had a therapist and a psychiatrist, and I'd be like, we can't just take the meds, and no, like there's intersection of all these things at once. This is, it's not cut and dry. But no. I just remember needing some grounding, and I reached out and said, can I have a Crone session?
Yeah.
And I know that there are women who've been this before, and but it was very important for me to have somebody like you who understood the responsibility that you have. And I know you work with your husband, and yet you're the queen of this, and Tim is a great support and a part of it, but you are the heavy, right? The response. And I think that's the inner psyche thing that my subconscious coping mechanisms were shedding. And you facilitated that. You started that facilitation back in 2015 and 16. But then when the capacity was too much, my therapist did help me see, this is not about this is about responsibility. Right, and so I wanted to talk with somebody who there is no option but to make your business work.
Well, exactly. That's right. Because, Tim has really come on board with my business, since 2014. That's when he really came on. So it's like 9 years ago. But before that, I mean, we were together, and he had his job, and, but my business was my business. And, even though I was flattened, it didn't mean that I stopped working. It didn't mean that I stopped providing services and that I didn't stop doing the things that I was doing. I just had to navigate that and negotiate my way through that. Yeah.
And I think that can translate to a lot of the people I've been talking to lately. And listen, I realize that I have parts that come across as jaded. I'll just own it. Like, when somebody's got a second glorious income and they're, I'm so glad that you have that, and I don't. And sometimes sometimes I've had friends, especially, look at my drive, which is part innate creativity, but then it's also an honoring of this, like, I get to do something I love. And then there's also a financial need. And
that's right.
And as we get older, I walked out to my 2014 paid for 100,000-mile truck the other day, and I just was like, you are the most gorgeous motherfucking vehicle I've ever had. And it's because she's paid for it. And in the past, I used to buy new cars. Like, I wanted things, and now I want to be able to make a choice and pay for my health care and my therapist and my hormone supplements and my art supplies and horse riding lessons. I could give a rat's ass about the latest car, purse, or clothing and all that other stuff.
Yeah. So
the priorities really shifted. So I'm curious, like, psychologically, do you remember what was the bullshit for you that fell off? I was joking before we went live. I was like, oh, Becoming Crone, that's when the bullshit goes. Like, you just like, no more, I'm not available for bullshit. So do you remember, and I say that affectionately, but do you remember any shift in the psychology of you that was just like, I'm not carrying these loads anymore?
Well, So that was really, right around that time is also when the Wild Heart Queen was born.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wasn't the Wild Heart Queen before menopause. So that's another thing to really think about, like that I came into the bullshit that fell away was a certain low self-esteem, not fully believing in myself. I mean, I was in the small pond and I was doing well and I had a good reputation in my community, blah, blah, all the stuff, it was a good thing. But there was a shift for me in this whole online thing, about coming out into the world in a bigger way, that I had to let go of this other bullshit around who I believe myself to be. And who I believe myself to be it was like never enough. I'm also a Virgo, in terms of astrology, and so there's a lot of that, like, it's never good enough. It's never good enough. So that was something that I really had to shed, that was a big, and there was also, there really was, I don't know, there was something about it just being more fun. So I was
You are
having,
so fun.
yeah.
I'm going to cry. I just,
Oh, honey.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so
It's
what's
good.
coming up?
I love it. Y'all get to see I just am touched a lot lately. And I obviously resonate with those, we can have a certain level of success and you can, you do. And y'all, Chris had a brick and mortar studio. I mean, it wasn't brick and mortar, it was wooden and it was adorable.
Yeah, right.
Bungalow. It was a bungalow.
It was a bungalow, yes.
She had, and I don't know if a lot of these online owners don't know what it's like to carry the cost of a hard place, a brick and mortar business. And so you had that, and then, and we can, I guess I'm at this space and it almost happened overnight. It was all stirring and then the pot dinged and everything was so clear. And part of it is because I've been doing a lot of work to care for those parts that were, I didn't even realize how insecure they were.
Right.
Because those coping skills, not skills, I want to distinguish, as my friend Mark says, between mechanisms and skills. So skills are intentional and mechanisms are our childhood responses that have now become patterns. And I think you and you're not a substance user. You and I had coping mechanisms that performed.
Oh yeah.
We're good in the world. We wanted to care for other people and behave. And I haven't gotten through the whole book, but I started reading, I can't remember the author. It's on one of my Audibles, but it was like adult children of neglect. And it was like, there are 5 types and goes through the first 4 and how they manifest. And then the 5th one, it was like, and the 5th one becomes a professional caretaker. And basically they're fucked.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, so
well, he didn't use that term, but that's what I heard. And it was like, because their coping skills make them money, keep them connected in society, are rewarded, people see, all these other things. And so to be able to draw out your confidence, and for me, I call it taking off the mask, those performance things. So that's, I felt that and appreciate your sharing of, the I don't mean those parts are bullshit. I think I'm having an experience right now. My head for well, not recently, but for most of my life, until at least mid 40s, I was always told and really felt that I was wiser than my years. And today I feel so much younger. I feel like I'm just now, like I can see where my head was cognitively wise before my years, but my body is delayed.
Yes.
And it's not, part of me is like, oh, it's just you, but I'm realizing there's so many of us, and I don't know if it's Gen X, I saw you say something about the younger kids are doing so much better about perceived negative emotions and but the things that we were taught as children, as women, stay small, don't feel, be positive, serve a man,
all that,
and all those I like the way Gabor Mate says, yeah, you can do anything with your mind, but you need to understand that the world made your mind. And
Right.
we
Right.
talk about deconstruction in religion and deconstructionism in systemic racism. And so I'm also deconstructing the world that made that very insecure girl.
That's right. And there's something else I really want to speak to too, which is that when I was going through this 15 years ago, there was hardly any, there was only the beginning glimmers of the understanding of trauma. You know, there was not the, you know, I mean, I know that people, marginalized people or people of color or indigenous people, like they were very well aware of all the systemic abuses. But, you know, I'm a white woman and I wasn't, I mean, you know, always have been and still am. And so that recognition of not only personal trauma, but collective trauma wasn't something I was dealing with 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, for people like you know, you're at this, you know, this crossroads, at this crux point, going through this transition in the face of this huge world transition where things are falling apart in a way that, you know, so it was easier for me in certain ways to, you know, I'm not saying that it was easy. I mean, it wasn't easy, but I think
it's just a different context. And there is more
a different context. Yeah.
Our nervous systems simply have more information.
Yes,
and I always think
right.
of, I think this is because of, you know, someone asked me in the last year, they said, are you intuitive? I said, listen, I used to think I was psychic, but I'm pretty just sure it's trauma brain.
Right. Exactly. That's right. Right.
Right. Exactly. This is the hypervigilance I live with. But because I see the patterns, I've always noticed, you know, it's like when I go into the grocery store, why is the grocery store overwhelming? Well, there's gazillions more bits of information in the grocery store if I could put a thumbtack on my nervous system. And now that we have, listen, and I really appreciate how that you're online, and I mean, I love my online, right? I'm not going to be one of those never do it's. Right. But we have so many bits of stimulus to our nervous systems.
Yeah.
So much more than we did 15 years ago.
Oh yeah. And, you know, I really didn't, I was developing a certain presence online, you know, like I would do things like this, you know, people would interview me and I would participate in different things. And I would offer classes through other people's things, but I didn't really come online in a big way until the pandemic. You know, I still maintained my in-person brick and mortar, you know, life because the online thing, it was helpful for me to get a kind of more visibility, you know, for me and my work. And so I'm really grateful for that. And it was fun. But, you know, I was doing 14 live retreats a year. You know, I had
I was always amazed at that. And
I know.
My brain was like, how, you know, but I went to work with you in 2015 and 16 was my year with you. We were live and in person.
Yep.
Chris wrote the what's that word called to the perimenopause or menopause, you know, brain, the forward.
Yes. Oh my God. The forward for your book.
She wrote the forward in my book. And then the very first story I tell is the day of waking up at your retreat, the day that what's his face became president.
Oh yeah. That idiot. Yeah. Right.
So you were still doing those in-person things at that time. And I just remember like they were already long, but then you were doing so many of them. I was aware of the physical effort that took.
Yes.
But you also had the demand for it.
I did.
Yeah. Like, right. Like make hay. And I mean, I remember signing up with you and I was like, I don't need the business aspect of this. I just want to come and paint in the woods with the old ladies.
Yep, that's right.
I wanted the wisdom of that was my crass way of saying I wanted the wisdom.
Right.
And I might have been, I think Antoinette was a little bit younger than me, but other than that, I might have been the youngest one in the room.
Oh yeah, you might have been. I'd have to look at that roster. But yeah.
I don't know exactly, but yeah. So now you're mostly online.
Oh yeah. Well, I started doing I've done 3 in-person retreats since January of 2022. So I've started back up again.
Yeah.
I found
Yeah.
another retreat venue because that was the other thing. Like there was, oh my God, the retreat venue that you participated in with me at Mountain Home Ranch burnt to the ground in 2017.
Burnt to the fucking ground.
To the
Every
fucking
last
ground.
bit of it. Yeah.
Every last bit of it. I mean, it was just a Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
it was
they
really
weren't just a retreat venue. Those people were like you and your husband would go on vacation there for years. They were like
Yeah.
family to y'all
They were
too.
family.
So
They were totally family. Yeah.
it wasn't just
Yeah.
the facility that was lost, but
No, it was a
that was
relationship.
devastating.
It was devastating. And there were a lot of things, like that. And then COVID happened. And then I gave up my studio that I'd had for 25 years. And, lost Ghost Ranch, which was another place that I was teaching. And then there was a place I was teaching up in the mountains and lost that because the woman who wanted to die. I mean, it was just like all these different, it was,
And I don't think people, I want to really acknowledge, and I'm going to acknowledge you publicly. And I wish I can say it was from a place of peace, but I'm also willing to let out my pissy parts. Like one of the things that I get so frustrated and immature in is how little people realize how much it takes behind the scenes. And it's not just planning. It is the bullshit that happens behind the scenes, or they change their mind, or they say something, or you're like, okay, this one worked. Can we duplicate it? And they're like, oh no, it's $12,000 more for next year. And there's a lot of, especially after COVID, the service industry is totally different and way more expensive.
Yeah.
And that's there's a lot of, for me, like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to really raise my prices if I, I'm not just gratuitously trying to raise my prices. Like there's way more cost involved. And so I just want to acknowledge that, because unless people actually do it, you have no clue.
You have no clue.
My brain sees, my brain sees the front of the scene, but
the behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, I almost gave up $25,000 this year. And I had a conversation with my psychotherapist who said, this is causing you undue stress. My request is that you come to a decision either way, because I was going to refund money I had been paid that was already spent, but I was just going to cancel it. I was like going to figure out, I'll just pull it out of my savings, or give me a payment plan and I'll pay 2 people back every month or something. But it was literally, it was so stressful. I was considering unloading $25,000 from my bank account to not do the event. And I'm not a drama queen.
I know you're not.
It was So I just acknowledging that, any part of this online world, it looks so easy to our clients, and we want it to feel that. We don't want them to feel the burden.
No,
but then some point,
they couldn't. They couldn't.
Right. No,
we wouldn't want it, and it's impossible unless you're in the thick of it. I mean, because it's like when Mountain Home Ranch burnt down in 2017, I had a teacher training group that was scheduled to meet 3 weeks after the fire. I had a whole new cohort that was starting in 2018. So I'm there. I don't have a place to teach. I don't have, and so it's that whole scramble. And this happened over and over and over again in so many different ways. And that's just one of the things.
And it's not just logistic. There's emotion. That's what it's, again, the intersection between solving. I always say that there's the math side and then the inner work. And please, people, have your brain in your business, but also all your emotion. That it's just thick, especially if you're highly sensitive and you're and you care. And over the years, I've had people say, well, why do you care so much? And then I'm like, how come you don't feel anything? So I appreciate you as somebody who feels and has also transitioned through that.
Yeah, because it's not, like you said, just the logistics. I mean, it's incredibly stressful, and it is that thing, like, I really care for my students. I was talking about this again. Tim and I are always having conversations about the work, but I was talking about how, like, I really bring love, and I know you do too. I actually really love my people. I really truly love my people, and that there's a real, it's like, how do being in that place of love and still having boundaries, with your people. But because I care for them, I don't want to just leave them in the lurch either, and I really want to take care of them and provide for them in all the ways that I can. So yeah, that's a whole other level of the stress.
My experience from then until now, from the skills I am building through the deep work I've done,
Right.
is love is not enough. You actually have embodied skills that demonstrate that love. So you have the love, but you have facilitation skills.
Yep. Up the wazoo.
and you can't have those facilitation skills without reconciling your own discomfort.
That's right.
Inside,
exactly.
Because otherwise your client's massive discomfort. I mean, the way you held, so I had a rejection sensitive dysphoria episode at your event.
Right.
And for me, those episodes are certainly not cognitively planned. I'm not known for being erratic like that. But it only comes up in professional experiences.
Right.
I've had about 4 major ones over the last 10 years. And the way I describe it is, and actually that time it was a teenager, but other times I've had the 3-year-old show up and she takes over my whole body. And my cognitive wise self can see and notice, and she's trying to calm, but it's like she's behind plexiglass.
Right.
And so out came this raging teenager. And normally my response is to fawn, but my response was to fight and flee. And I just remember you saying, you can be angry and I was like, I'm leaving, I'm going to the airport. And you were like, it's okay if you want to leave. I hope that you don't, but it's okay if you do. And you were so compassionate, right? There was not an ounce of you did it wrong, Allison, in you that day.
Yeah.
And that was the first time ever that my body remembers. Now before then, listen, it may have happened, but I was so disassociated from my body that was the doorway to, this isn't just cognitive. You can know all the things, but it's an integrated skill to be able to behave in compassion.
Yes.
And holding space.
Absolutely.
An intention will not do it. And so I'm aware now of, I don't know all your trauma, but anybody that grew up without knowing about trauma, I guarantee you, everybody was neglected. And so at bare minimum, we have even, I remember a colleague of mine who's a therapist, he's actually a psychiatrist, and he was talking to me one time and he's like, do you have any childhood trauma? And at the time I was like, I don't have any childhood trauma. And then I learned that neglect, being a Gen X kid was. I think this is one of the things I want to get through to, especially my listeners and the leaders. There's a lot of grown women who are wiser than their years, but they're having emotional eruptions or grinding that can no longer be shoved down. And they didn't even know they shoved it down.
That's right.
And it's starting to interfere. And then because we can't necessarily, because it's such a strong and quick reaction, then comes the shame and the imposter syndrome. And then who am I to, and what I'm learning now is the context of what we're talking about is actually a developmental phase.
It is very much so. Yeah.
And in my psychology books, which I have a master's degree in educational psychology, and I have an undergraduate degree in child psychology, the names are called something different, but that's what they are. They stopped at 25 and picked up at 55 with midlife crisis.
Right.
And they did not talk about the developmental phases of adults in this age. And they certainly didn't talk about developmental phases of being a senior. That's a whole nother conversation too.
That's a whole other conversation, right? That's right. Yeah. Right. And they weren't talking about menopause either.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, so, here we are like, oh, I'm just going to go and live life. And then all of a sudden the inside of your psyche starts living you. And when you're 20 and 30 years old, we have the physical, mental, emotional capacity to disassociate and cut it off.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was the thing I couldn't not do. I wasn't not going to deal with my stuff like you. I'm obsessed and in love with this thing called growth in life.
Yes.
And
Right.
If you would go back, I know we kind of derailed, but that the bullshit you unloaded coming online, you said insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I make up in my mind that in some ways you had to, it wasn't, I mean, it happened to coincide at the time, but if you still had that insecurity, the online wouldn't have been as effective, right? Like, it's not the tool of the time online met you at the moment you were also becoming more confident.
That's right.
Right. Because I think there's a lot of people that use the tools and they're wondering why it's not working. And it really is an inner work journey.
It's an inner work journey.
That's what I'm making up in my mind. I did not know you then, but
no, it's true.
Yes, it was new and it was helpful. And there's some inner work behind using that tool of online.
Well, that's the thing, you know, I couldn't have met it if I hadn't already been doing that work. Yeah. So it was a confluence of, you know, I was at that point in my life. I had done the work, you know, I was having postmenopausal zest, you know, I was ready and I had prepared to be ready too. And so it was a venue. It was like, oh, so it felt really good because it really matched up with what I needed and with where I was. But right, you know, if I hadn't done that work around that shedding and that stepping into myself, and it was also happening along the way too. It's not like I just burst into the online scene like fully healed.
It was the next growth evolution of, you know, the next progression of your business.
It was a progression of my business, but it was also a progression of my own personal growth. Yeah, because it was the kind of thing where I would try different things and I would stretch myself in certain ways. And so, you know, like you, I mean, I'm lifelong. I'm, you know, like I started doing personal growth. In fact, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and there was a place called the Sono Institute, and they had yoga and different personal growth kinds of things. And it closed from lack of interest. And that's why I left Pittsburgh and came to California. It just wasn't available. So yeah. But yeah, so it is that thing. Like I really took it on too. I took on that journey as a journey. So it was a business thing. It was helping me make more money, all those things, which was great. But it was one of the things that was so much fun about it and so exciting about it was that it was also an opportunity and an avenue for me to continue this personal growth work. Of shedding the bullshit, of allowing myself to be seen. You know, I remember like I really claim myself as a writer now, but I didn't really, you know, I wrote copy, you know, before, but in terms of writing, you know, I've written a book now and I've, you know, written hundreds. Oh, my book.
We'll promote it. I'll tell everybody all the ways to work with you. And I have your book right here on my desk to talk about those things.
I love that. But, you know, I didn't, I really started writing in 2007, you know, so it was right around that same time. That was part of my evolution. And I can remember like being so terrified about, like, I would write a blog post and then, you know, I would have to push send. I'd have to, you know, put it out into the world. And I would literally put my hand over my eyes.
Oh, you're so cute.
Push the button and then pretend somebody else wrote it. Like I had to do that in the beginning, you know, but I kept doing it. That was the thing, you know, I didn't let that old definition of me, that old identity of me get in the way. And so the more I did those things, the more I grew, the more confidence I developed, the more fun it became. And it was a continual, was a continual growth process for sure.
It's a practice.
It's a total practice. It's a total practice.
I wrote
Yeah.
this morning about the horses, and it's only my second time back on them. And she's like, yeah, this goes much faster if you do it every single day. Cause I was really trying to get it into I was trying to kind of make some like help my body remember by slowing down, because it feels really, what I think is sitting in the saddle ride is differently. And there's a different, and the person I'm working with comes from a therapeutic background. It's holistic. And, I join people 5 days a week in a writing practice, and sometimes I paint, and sometimes I read, and sometimes I write.
Right.
And but it's creative for me. And on Saturdays and Sundays, I practically suffocate because I want other people to do with that. It's like it's become a ritual.
Right.
But the business stuff too is another creative practice.
It's a total creative practice. Well, and that was the thing that, because I remember, so this was 2001. This was earlier than, I was, before 2008, a number of years before that. And I didn't have a website. It was 2001. And there was a .com crash here in the Bay Area. And so there was this guy who had been in the .com world, and he had a flyer up on a telephone pole saying he would do websites. So I pulled his little tag and called him. His name was Brad. And he did my website for like $350, and he did a fabulous job. It was very simple. And the thing I really learned in doing that is like, oh, this is really creative. It was that thing, like, this isn't just something I'm going to do that's going to feel tedious. And it's like, no, it was really fun. And so it's bringing that creativity. So yeah, when people would ask me what my practices were, so one of my spiritual practices is developing those skills that I have to work with people, and being in that sacred space and holding space and going to those depths. So that's a spiritual practice. But the business was also a practice for sure. And it still is. But yeah.
I'm taking that in from you, and everything, I call them nourishing practices, but I look at anything that's working in my life. And so I have psychological practices, and I have a couple of weeks ago, one of my clients who I've known for a long time, she comes from the original world that I came from, coaching wise. And when I told my membership group that I was going to be closing down the doors, her jaw dropped, because I wasn't closing it down because it wasn't successful.
Right. Exactly. Right.
And I also said, I'm not going to be doing these events, and I'm not going to be doing my leadership program, which basically means I was stopping 100% of my revenue.
Yep.
And she looked at me and she was like, how in the fuck are you doing this? And I couldn't, that whole week I was so grounded, and I was like, I got 3 things for you. And I said, you do 2 of these, but you don't do the 3rd one. And I don't mean that as a judgment, but you want to know how to do it. I said, just like you, I have spent 20 years honing my craft.
Right.
Just this week, I've listened to 4 hours of IFS sessions from all different, immersing myself in the learning of the skills and the nuance. And I said, and I've spent the last 20 years learning sales and marketing, and getting up and connecting and marketing and creating so much that it doesn't even feel like I'm selling.
Right.
So I know I have those schools. And the 3rd thing that I just started a few years ago is that every single day I have a parts practice, and I practice both, in my journal, but I'm also in the car, and I notice something happened in my body or my head, and I have a little process that I do with my parts. And I said that I do that every single day. So I'm building muscles that create, that create a result, but you're focusing on the result or worrying about the result instead of just dropping in and doing the practices.
Yeah. Right.
And
that's
that,
a whole other
brushing your
conversation.
teeth is a practice. Putting on your skincare is a practice. What I eat is a practice. The things we do in our business, and our world is so by now results oriented.
Oh yeah.
One of my messages, I want to glorify what seems boring. I want to glorify the practice. And you do this primarily through the modality of art. But what's interesting to me is your practice of writing is actually what had me buy now. Because at the time I called you and had already made the decision. I just needed to know how much it was and where to send the money.
I remember that. That was a great conversation.
But you weren't even putting images with it. You were just writing conversations with the brush. There were little short snippets, very similar. Some of yours in your book are longer, but you've done some actually recently in the last couple of days. I've noticed that style. And you would just almost like somebody writes a play, and you would write what the student says, and you would write your response. And I was able to see your skill through the expression of your practice of writing in front of people.
Yes.
And I think people think they need to have a 5-step plan or a content buckets or all these other things. And really, I see you doing daily practice.
Yeah, exactly. It's a daily practice. That's right. It's a daily practice. And again, it's not tedious. It's fun. I enjoy it. I open to what wants to come through me and trust it, all of those things, all of those things. Yeah.
The practice is not, for me, not just the behavior, but it's the intention behind it, right? So just in the same way, like sometimes we approach the canvas, I always called it the I hate my boyfriend phase, like the phase where you're screaming, fuck you. And I noticed this over the last, it's been not quite a year, almost a year since I finished my book, not quite. But of being in that room for 3 years. And then I have other colleagues that are, publishing their books this year. And it's been so fun to watch them go through something that I didn't know I was going through. Like the I hate your, like I tried to write today and nothing happened. But the fact that you got to the page with your pen.
Yes.
Or that you got to the canvas with, my painting practice. I know your audio people can't see it, but this is as big as my painting practice got today, which was just slapping a little color on my journal.
Right.
And there's still a little color on the page.
Yeah, exactly.
And
that's right.
Is
that's
enough.
It's enough. It's enough.
And that's enough. I think I'm finding that that's also the way I care for myself in menopause, because my body today is not the same as it was yesterday. And I don't know what it will be tomorrow.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that is such a roller coaster. It's being with they call it the change, and that's no joke because you are constantly changing, and it is constantly changing. And I mean, that was my experience too. I would try something or take a supplement or, do a practice or go get acupuncture. And sometimes then it would work beautifully. And then all of a sudden it wasn't working at all. And then I had to kind of find another way, So,
the uncertainty. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I'm just looking for clarity. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're looking for certainty. And there ain't any. What wisdom would you give women who are in that perimenopause, menopause? What mother wisdom would you give them?
Well, I mean, to realize that the compassion piece is huge.
Yeah.
The compassion piece is huge. And to realize that there's nothing wrong. I mean, this is a process. This is a process that's not well supported even now. I mean, I think about in more kind of indigenous cultures, there would be a lot more recognition that there'd be space and time for rest. There'd be space and time to kind of move into that elder phase, and that doesn't happen. So to recognize, to really, how do you bring that to yourself? So the compassion, slowing things down, giving yourself space to rest, to, not even do anything, I mean, there's some wisdom in that. I mean, and to recognize that you are going through a seismic shift, and it takes a lot of energy to do that. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that. So, really, take as good of care of yourself as you can. Yeah.
And then that is a head-on collision with dirty capitalism.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, because yes, that's what needs to happen. And that is not. So to recognize that it's harder than it needs to be because of dirty capitalism. It's
Yeah.
harder than it needs to be because there isn't a lot of societal support,
Right.
for
The
women.
systems don't support. Yeah,
The
they don't
systems don't
support
support
it.
it. The systems don't support
And
it.
I always tell people, I said, listen, I'm not, because I make up. Nobody's ever really said, my husband is like, you've gotten really negative lately. And I'm like, I'm just not bullshitting optimist. I'm a realist with hope. And for me, seeing the
Yes,
systems,
that's
it
right.
is hard. There is grief. But when I can see how the Legos are built,
Yeah.
then I actually have power, not over the system, but I have power to consider the modifications that I want to navigate.
Yes. Right. Right.
That,
That's right.
right. So
Yes, that's right. And that's the thing, it's like recognizing that it's hard. Not that menopause, I think that menopause would always be, well, it's a huge change. It's a huge transition. But if it were supported, it wouldn't be as hard as it is. So, that's where the dirty capitalism piece comes in. The expectation.
Well, when you were talking about even when you told me do nothing, and I'm sure when I tell people, over the last few years, I've created a business where I can create space. And part of that was out of necessity because I get tired at 2. My brain starts working. And even with my ADD meds, that actually brings amazing, like those are, for me, those really are supportive. And there was one that I was taking all day long. And I was like, I don't need it that long. And so it's okay for me to take a different one that wears off around 12:30 or 1, because I'm not going to be working from 2. I don't, that's my lay around and do nothing time.
Yes.
Spend excessive amounts of time watching TV and playing Candy Crush. Those are part of my nourishing practices.
Those are nourishing
so
practices.
Some people,
absolutely.
I know that some people are, they're running at that Mach 10. I fortunately had some early perimenopause stuff that required me. I was helping a client the other day, Chris. I said, let me pull up this old document. And I pulled up a document from those days when I was kind of sharing a math plan of offerings. And I was like, hold on, let me delete a bunch of these, because nobody in their right mind needs this many offerings. It's not smart. Right. But, and so I've been able to ease, I guess if you call not firing, but closing down all your programs and building your roster back up. But I'm chuckling that I'm going back to a simple one-on-one model, which in the online capitalism and coaching world is like, I think it's so funny when people are like, do you want to scale your business? You get all these cold pitches and you're like, why is scale?
Yeah.
I get the math equation of scale, but
that's
I'm
all
unscaling everything.
Right.
Yeah. And I love math, but math, I call it emotion. You got to have your P&L together. I'm big on that. I saw a thing. One of my friends pointed it out. And it was, she does these, I took a picture of it. I've got to write about it at some point, but it's like, I have a friend that does reviews of intake forms and the bullshit that people say. And it's not just to tear them down. It's actually really to think about the nuance of your intake. So this person says, you're a fit. It doesn't identify who it is. It says, you're a perfect fit to apply. And this is to a high-end sisterhood accelerator. Feeling overwhelmed and unsure of the next step to grow your business to 6 and 7 figures, which is very different. 6 figures to 7 figures is extremely different. And then it says, you want to be running your business from your feminine wisdom magic, not your head. And I wanted to scream, you can't get rid of your head too. Then it's not a business, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I love the math, but the math fueled by an emotional P&L.
Yeah, exactly. And it is that thing. It's like, what you're doing is part of that wisdom of menopause, which is what works for you. So that is the whole thing about really disentangling or disengaging from the dominant culture expectations, like to keep scaling, to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you were like, no, that's not what works for me. And that's part of the thing about becoming crone, and the wisdom is listening to yourself. And, and maybe for some women, for me at that time when I was 55, the expansion, I never scaled in the way that people talk about scaling, but, I was out there in the world in a bigger way. And that really worked for me at that time, but, I think for anybody going through this transition, that's part of what you're letting go of, is letting go of who you think you're supposed to be, or who the culture expects you to be, or doing it the right way, or doing it the way that everybody else does it. There's a lot of courage that it takes to really choose your own well-being is in the ways that you can. I mean, I
well,
get
and
that. Yeah.
the caveat that scale for everybody is not out of alignment. It just wasn't in
No, it's
alignment
not.
for you or me.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
there
Yeah.
are certain people that their capacity is able, maybe they're able to. So one of the things I really practiced with was having help. And Amber did so much for me. She could do the physical task, but that didn't stop the weight of scale on my mental load,
That's right.
which is
That's
my
right.
responsibility.
That's right.
And
Exactly
so,
right. Yeah.
So I don't want to be bashing, not that you
No. I
are,
don't.
but I,
No. Yeah. No,
like
I'm
for
not at
some
all. But I'm just
people, it's
saying.
going to
Yeah.
be different, but
Yeah.
mental,
Yeah.
that's the other thing. I don't know, as I talk to my clients, especially who are all pretty high achievers, they're implementers, they're doers, they're visionary, they're intuitive, they care, they do have aspirations, and some of their thinking is, am I doing it wrong? Am I doing it wrong? And I do think there is a buildup of the expectations, even in those of us who thought we were being authentic. That's how deep those expectations.
It goes so deep. It goes so deep. Yeah.
It's so deep.
Yeah. It goes so deep. Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
So
and that's why
deep.
it's a constant, it doesn't end. I mean,
well, and then the people pleasing of when you start to gently deconstruct and literally deconstruct the knots that you've built up, then there's all the people pleasing and boundaries.
Yes.
And boundaries aren't just a thing we put out there. Like, to be able to be a boundary is an inner work process.
Right. To be a boundary. I love that. But
the acknowledgement, and I remember when I talked to you that day, and the compassion, so you just said that, the compassion that you gave me was a reminder of what you just said, the compassion, because my brain showed up, go, what am I doing wrong? Is there something wrong with you?
Exactly.
It's not well supported. Compassion. And then I can almost feel when you told me, you said, I asked for advice. You didn't offer it unsolicited. And you said, do as little as you can for the next year at least.
Yeah. Right.
And, my decisions weren't cognitive, recent business decisions weren't cognitively about that. There were some more emotional stuff that happened to fit it. But I remember my body going, like my soul going, that feels so nourishing. And my muscle memory going, we can't fucking do that. We gotta make money.
Exactly.
Right. Like, and so there's gonna be when those of us are in it, that when we approach this new idea of doing less, but the other thing we have at this age of 50 to 55 is we have time on task, and we don't realize how efficient.
Yes.
So like you said, when you came online, and yes, you were in Zest, but even if you're not in Zest, you're probably way more efficient and way more successful and credible than you give yourself for if you've been practicing.
That's right.
These skills.
That's right. Exactly.
Your brain is in the same way my brain still thinks I'm 20 years old. My brain has also been practicing these things. So
that's
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, it's that mastery. No, that makes total sense. Well, it's the mastery thing. I mean, you really step into a certain level of mastery, and you can bring that to so many different things that you're doing.
And we can shed the bullshit, the expectations. Then that's what I'm actually finding, is that there actually is capacity. When I'm not trying to, and I'm talking subconscious. Listen, there is no day that I woke up and said, how can I make everybody but myself happy? That was never my MO, but it was those coping skills. Yeah. But I do remember following my irritation, and I'm like, why am I irritated? Oh, because I've set this up, and this is the result I'm getting, not because of the people. And what do I want? Irritation shows me what I want. What I want is my work to be valued. That's when I'm energized.
Right.
Let's recreate this.
That's right.
And by the way, you have the skills to do it. And it is less work and just as much money, if not more, maybe. I know.
Yes.
If we would trust the mastery that we've earned.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
It won't be as hard to do very little and make just as much.
Exactly. But that's the thing. That is the thing. I mean, that is the thing.
But
that
we
I
need
also
mentors
experienced.
like you showing up with compassion and going, oh, yes, here you are. Welcome. This is
Yeah,
normal.
it's normal.
I know
Yeah.
it feels, I mean, I remember you saying, I know, like just the empathy and understanding. Yes, it does feel crazy making. And I think that's what you're talking about, what we miss in the
Yes.
indigenous traditions. We don't have a red tent. I
Right.
remember asking my mom, and my mom is so sweet. My mom's like, yeah, I had 4 kids and it was really easy. And I don't really remember my menopause. It must have been easy. And I was like, no.
Yeah. No. Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love you, Mom, if you're watching, and you probably are. And I'm glad you
Yeah.
have good memories, but my real life
Yeah.
experience is different than your memories. And I get that.
Yeah.
Why would we want to remember some of that hard stuff? But
Yeah.
yeah. Anything else that's coming up for you? See if I had any other words written down. I wrote down creative restoration. I will say that you realize your legacy lives through me, even though I did
know.
painting
Yes.
retreats, but
Yes.
it's so
I do
fun.
know
Like,
that. Yeah.
it's so fun to watch people that have come to my various painting retreats that are now doing their own, or that are now, I have one woman that does, like, she actually sold her first $10,000 painting, and she used to be in project
Wow.
management.
Oh my God,
And then
that's so great. Yeah.
she takes her version of expressive arts. She has an art degree, but she takes it into like the CEOs of L'Oreal and does creative workshops with CEOs and stuff. It's really,
Nice.
it's so it's fun, because every once in a while I'm like, oh, I'm not in the studio anymore. And I'm like, my studio just look, my paint supplies are words right now.
Yeah.
And they had to be able to write that book. But the creative act restores the soul.
Yep.
And I think it's interesting that I saw in your bio, you said, I wasn't always, can't remember the word you used, and it probably matters. You didn't consider yourself creative.
Right.
And
right.
I think people have an identity that if they're not making art, they're not creative. And I will argue to the death about that.
Yes, of course. Yes, because creativity. Yes, that's right. Right. You and I both know
But
that.
anything you want to say about creative practice?
Do it.
In these regards. Do it. And do it with Chris. I always tell people, I was like, get thee to Chris Zydel's classes, get thee to her training program. Even if you don't need the training program, there's something about the circle of people over time. And I know Leslie came, and she came and she came and facilitated with me. She is so good, and she creates art all the time too. So it's fun to kind of see. And you and I both don't have children. I have bonus kids, but our business is an entity that is also nurtured. It's a child, like
absolutely. Well, Well, you think about children as a creation, like, when people have children, it's a creative act. And instead of having children, because I was the eldest of 8, and I was like, no, thank you, I'm not interested. Did that, but, this whole business thing was, always has been and still is a creative act. Yeah. And the work is that.
Yeah. Okay, your book is Conversations with the Brush. So for those of you listening, I'm holding the book up. We'll put the book in the show notes. But Wisdom Tales from the Heart. Tales from the Intuitive Painting Heart. Yes. I have my computer glasses on, not my reading glasses.
Okay. Yeah.
And it literally is conversations, and then you also have some beautiful prompts in there. Also, next to my desk is
the cards.
Your cards, and I don't know if you sell those on your website.
Do. Oh yeah, they're on the website.
But it's fun. You can if I'm sitting here at the blank page and I'm overwhelmed by it, you can pull a card and it says, "Try painting with a bigger brush." Right? It just gives you little prompts to get you going, which I think is. It's all process based, and you really did teach me. I'm still profoundly moved by the fact that in working with you, we used poster paper because in the end, we threw the end result away. I mean, we could keep it if we want to, but ultimately mine have all gone in the trash.
Right.
To represent that the value is in the process, not the product.
That's right. Exactly.
Which was hard for me to let go, but I've become a full-on process person.
Yay!
Your website is Creative Juices Arts.
That's right.
Is there anything you're offering right now? What is, if somebody wants to come spend time in your amazing, magical, but also so fucking grounded, like y'all realize there are very few mystics out there that are also human. And I have a bee in my bonnet because I use spirituality to bypass, but your feet are on the fucking ground of living this wild edge of
thanks, darling.
not using spirituality to escape, which you put out there. And so you're really both and there. What are you on right now?
Well, I have an ongoing thing, which is every month I have weekly painting classes, and there's usually some openings for new people. I mean, a lot of people that come to those classes stay month after month after month after month, and they don't ever want to leave. But there's always some openings in those. And so at the beginning of every month, there's always so you just sign up for my newsletter that you can get on the newsletter, and then that will tell you when the next round is going to happen. So that's. I have a teacher training program, but that's started already. So I'm not really,
I was going to say
there'll be another one next year.
By May.
Yeah.
And are you doing any one-off retreats or?
Well, they're all filling in house. I mean, that's the thing. I don't, it's really hard. I don't have a lot to market right now. So I have my book, I have the cards, and the classes are, there are openings in those.
Yeah.
So
and follow her on Facebook. She writes every single day and shares. And I've actually caught a few glimpses. You don't share your personal painting practice, like you don't share visuals of your painting. Every once in a while, it's never yours. I was gonna say every once in a while I've seen. Okay.
That's a whole thing. I don't want people feeling that this is the way that they have to do it. Which is
exactly because. You're valuing the process, not the end result.
Bingo. Yes.
Right. And so there's no like, oh, I'm not painting like Chris. Yeah, exactly. It's not about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, I mean, your work is through the modality of the brush and the paints and the supplies and the paper and the container. Somebody else's might be cooking or music, or I have a client that her creative time is her nature walk every single morning.
Right. And, exactly. Right. That's right.
Those kind of things. And then just the gentleness with the discomfort in life. Oh, that's what you gave to me. Nobody had ever done that before. And I pulled that thread, and now I'm living it and teaching it. And so, I mean, I'm proud of the art moving on, but if I had to pick one, I would pick the compassion and gentleness with the uncomfortable emotions.
Love that. That's pretty much it. Underline. Yes. Thanks, darling.
Thank you so much for coming. And if you ever do put together some kind of Crone wisdom cohort, the other thing I heard it today already from somebody I just met, is the loneliness in this space. And the loneliness of, and I will say, so like your people that come back, Bill looked at me the day after I published my book, and I come into my office and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Writing practice." And he's like, "You just published your book." And I'm like, "Writing practice."
Right.
And
that's right.
writing practice is about the practice, but it's also about the co-regulation with other people on a creative living journey.
That's right.
And so, if you ever do one of those for us menopausal ladies,
I'm thinking, I'm actually putting something together. So you'll be the first to know. Great.
I always have ideas for other people's businesses that I have no energy to implement.
But no, I had been thinking about that before you asked me about it. So
I love it. Thank you so much for spending time. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll put all of Chris's information in the show notes on the podcast. And Creative Juices Arts, not juice.
Creative Juices Arts with an S and Arts with an S. Yeah.
And then Chris Zydel on you work mostly under your Facebook profile. You don't have a
Yes.
page, right?
No, I don't have a page. Yeah, I just have Chris
Yeah.
Zydel
So
on Facebook.
you don't have to
Yeah.
friend request her, just follow her. You probably should be able to follow her and
Mhm.
see her stuff. You don't have to bombard her. If for some reason you do send her a friend request, introduce yourself to her and say, I heard you on Allison's show or podcast or something. She may or may not accept, but that's a thing. So thank
that's
you,
a great
honey.
thing. Yeah.
I'm
Thanks,
going to
love.
hit
This
in
was so great.
broadcast and then say, mwah.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll see you
so much
soon.
love.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.